Welcome back to another episode of the Unfiltered Political Ends podcast. Today, we're diving right into part two, Inside the Machine, and how bureaucratic corruption actually operates. We're going to get right into it. Part one exposes the structure of bureaucratic power and the vulnerabilities within it. Then part two goes deeper into how corruption actually functions. Once it takes root, because the corruption inside the executive branch is rarely chaotic or impulsive. It is often methodical, incremental, and hidden within processes that appear completely normal on the surface. It doesn't usually begin with a major crime, it begins with small decisions, rationalizations, and opportunities that slowly evolve into something far more serious. To understand how this works, you have to look at the behavior, incentives, and the internal culture of bureaucratic systems. Most corruption inside bureaucracies does not start with someone waking up and deciding to break the law. It begins with pressure to meet targets and to align with the leadership expectations and to protect an agency's reputation or to maintain influence. Within large institutions, there is often an unspoken understanding that certain outcomes are preferred over others. When those preferences are strong enough, they can subtly shape decision making. A report might be worded differently, an investigation might be delayed, a regulation might be enforced more aggressively in one situation than another. None of these actions on their own may seem like corruption, but together they form a pattern, one where the system begins to bend around internal priorities rather than public accountability. Excuse me. One of the most clearest ways this manifests is through networks of influence. Bureaucracies are now not just systems. They are communities of people who work together over long periods of time. The relationships form trust and build informal alliances, which ultimately develop. Now, these networks they can be positive, helping agencies function efficiently, but they can also become protective structures where the individuals look out for one another, sometimes at the expense of transparency. And in corruption cases, this often shows up as a kind of internal shielding. Colleagues may avoid reporting misconduct, and the supervisors may downplay the issues, and investigations may be quietly redirected. Or they may even be minimized. But over time, this creates an environment where wrongdoing is not just possible, it is insulated. This insulation is often reinforced by the hierarchy in the executive branch. The authority flows from the top down, and decisions made at a higher levels can shape the behavior of entire agencies. And when the leadership signals explicitly or implicitly that certain outcomes are desirable, lower level officials may adjust their actions accordingly. This doesn't always involve direct orders. In many cases, it's about interpretation. People learn what is rewarded and what is ignored and what is discouraged. And once those patterns are understood, the behavior begins to align with them. This is how corruption can spread without even being formally declared. It becomes embedded in the culture, and a powerful example of how bureaucratic systems can be influenced from within comes from the revelations surrounding the Edward Snowden disclosures. These disclosures showed how large scale surveillance programs operated within a framework that many insiders consider normal, even as they raise significant concerns externally. What's important here is not just the existence of the programs, but how they were sustained, and they were supported by layers of authorization and internal justification and institutional acceptance. This illustrates a key point once a system normalizes its behavior. It becomes much harder to challenge even if that behavior is controversial or potentially overreaching. Another critical factor in how corruption operates and control over the process of bureaucracies, they rely on the procedures, forms, and approvals, and also the reviews. A documentation of these processes are designed to ensure the consistency and the accountability, but they can also be manipulated. For example, delaying a decision can be just as powerful as making one. An investigation that drags on for months or even years can lose momentum, and the witnesses may become less cooperative, and public's attention may fade. Similarly, selectively prioritizing certain cases over others can shape outcomes without ever appearing overtly biased. This kind of procedural control is one of the most subtle and effective tools within bureaucratic systems. The role of information cannot be overstated. Now, instead, the executive branch of information is power. Excuse me. Those who control the data, reports, and internal communications, which have the ability to influence not just the decisions but the perceptions. The information can be filtered, framed, or withheld in ways that shape the narratives, both the agency and externally. And it doesn't always involve outright falsehoods. It is about emphasis and what is highlighted, what is minimized, and what is left out entirely. In a complex system where new people have access to the full picture, even small adjustments in the information flow can have significant effects. This dynamic becomes especially important when dealing with the oversight. External oversight bodies, whether congressional committees, inspectors general, or the courts, they depend on the accurate and complete information to function effectively. Now, if that information is incomplete or delayed, oversight becomes less effective. And it's not always a result of intentional corruption, but when it is, it can significantly weaken the accountability process. The challenge is that proving intent in these situations is often difficult, which allow questionable practices to persist in gray areas. Another layer of the bureaucratic corruption involves the intersection of public service as well as private interests. The revolving door phenomenon plays a major role here, and the officials who work in regulatory agencies often develop deep expertise and connection within the industries they oversee. When they leave the government, the service, they may move into private sector roles or where the expertise is highly valuable. And this movement is not inherently corrupt, but it can create incentives that can influence the behavior, while still in office. The decisions made today can shape the opportunities tomorrow, and over time, this can lead to a form of alignment between the regulators and the regulated, where the strict enforcement becomes less likely and cooperation becomes the norm. Also, financial corruption, while more visible, often follows similar patterns. It rarely begins with large scale fraud. Instead, it may start with small favors of expedited approvals, inside information, or preferential treatment. As these actions go unchallenged, they can escalate into more significant misconduct, such as kickbacks or contract manipulation. The Operation Third Wind demonstrates how the networks of officials and contractors could operate within the system, using relationships and access to influence the outcomes. And what makes this possible was not just individual wrongdoing, but a system that allowed those relationships to develop without sufficient checks. Sexual misconduct within the bureaucratic environments follows a different but equally important system. Here, the key factor is the power imbalance in hierarchical organizations where supervisors have significant control over the careers of those below them. This can create situations where the individuals feel pressured to tolerate inappropriate behavior to avoid reporting it altogether. This issue is compounded when internal reporting systems are perceived as ineffective or biased. Investigations may be handled within the same chain of command, leading to the concerns about the fairness and transparency. Over time, this can create a culture of silence where misconduct continues because it's not uh, challenged, and the reports of misconduct and systemic issues within the agencies, like the Department of Veterans Affairs, They have highlighted how difficult it can be to address these problems once they become embedded. In many cases, the issue is not a lack of rules, but a lack of enforcement. The policies may exist on paper, but if they are not applied consistently, or if violations are not taken seriously, they lose their effectiveness. And the gap between the policy and practice is one of the most persistent challenges in addressing bureaucratic corruption. What ties all of these elements together is the concept of normalization over time. The behaviors that might once have been considered unacceptable can become routine, and this process is gradual and often unnoticed by those in the system. It is reinforced by the success if a questionable action leads to a desired outcome without consequences. It becomes easier to justify repeating it, and eventually the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior begins to blur. And yet, despite all that corruption within bureaucracies, it is not unstoppable. It is often exposed to a combination of internal and external forces. Whistleblowers play a crucial role in this, bringing attention to the issues that might otherwise remain hidden. Investigative journalism can amplify those revelations, creating public pressure for accountability, and oversight bodies can conduct independent reviews, uncovering the patterns and identifying the failures. These mechanisms are not perfect, but they are essential. And the challenge moving forward is not just to respond to corruption when it is discovered, but to understand how it develops and addresses the conditions that allow it to grow. This means improving the transparency and strengthening oversight and protecting whistleblowers and ensuring that the accountability is both consistent and credible. It also means recognizing that the corruption itself um, is not always obvious, and it often exists in the gray areas where intent is unclear and actions are difficult to categorize. In the end, the story of bureaucratic corruption is not just about the individuals or even institutions. It is about the systems that can function effectively under the right conditions, but that can also drift when those conditions are not maintained. Now, understanding the dynamic is the first step toward ensuring that power is used responsibly and that the structures designed to serve the public continue to do so. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Unfiltered Political Ends podcast, and we will see you in part 3. Thanks. Peace.